Nestled deep in a wide valley, surrounded by golden wheat fields and rolling green hills, lay a quiet little village. It was the kind of place where mornings began with the crow of a rooster, where neighbors greeted one another by name, and where the scent of freshly baked bread often drifted from kitchen windows into the cool dawn air. The village was simple, almost timeless. Dirt paths crisscrossed between wooden cottages, smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and children's laughter echoed near the riverbanks where they played after school. Life here moved at its own gentle rhythm, untouched by the noise of cities. In a weathered but sturdy cottage on the village's edge lived a boy named Ethan, together with his mother Clara. Ethan was 12, tall for his age, with untidy hair the color of chestnuts and a restless spark in his eyes. His father had passed away when Ethan was very young, leaving Clara to raise him alone. Though life had not been easy for them, Clara carried herself with quiet dignity, and Ethan had grown up learning the value of kindness and honesty. Yet there was one thing Ethan struggled with deeply. He often waited for others to solve his problems. Whether it was fixing a broken fence, carrying heavy water buckets, or finishing chores in the field, Ethan had learned to depend on the promises of neighbors, relatives, and friends. Somehow, someone always said, "Don't worry, I'll help tomorrow," and Ethan, trusting and hopeful, always believed them. For Clara, this was both a comfort and a concern. She loved her son's faith in people, but she worried he had not yet learned the strength that comes from standing firmly on one's own 2 feet. That summer, the valley was particularly beautiful. The wheat fields shimmered under the sun like oceans of gold, and the village prepared for the upcoming harvest. Everyone worked tirelessly, for the harvest determined how families would survive the long winter ahead. Clara and Ethan's field stretched behind their cottage. It was not large, but it was theirs. Clara often reminded Ethan that the land was their inheritance, a gift from his father, and a responsibility they must care for together. Ethan would not, but more often than not, he'd find reasons to delay the hard tasks, convinced that help was always just around the corner. Little did he know, life was about to test him in ways he never expected. Ethan loved the wheat fields. On bright mornings, he would wander into the tall stalks, running his fingers along the golden heads, listening to the whispering sound they made when the wind passed through them. It was almost like the fields spoke a secret language only he could hear. Sometimes he would lie flat on his back among the wheat and stare at the endless sky above. He dreamed of adventure, of becoming someone important, maybe a merchant who traveled far-off lands, or a storyteller who could charm entire villages with words. But dreams, he thought, always came later. For now, there was no rush. Clara often found him like this, daydreaming when chores were waiting. "Ethan," she'd call gently, "the fence by the chicken coop is loose again. Will you fix it today?" "Of course, Mama," Ethan would answer, smiling, "but maybe I'll ask Uncle Samuel to help. He's strong and can do it much faster." And so the pattern continued. Neighbors offered promises of help. Ethan accepted them without doubt. But days often passed without action, leaving small tasks undone until Clara eventually took them upon herself. Clara worried, but she said little. She wanted Ethan to grow, to stumble, to discover truths on his own. She knew life was the best teacher, and sooner or later it would present him with a test he could not avoid. Ethan, meanwhile, believed in people's words more than his own effort. Why struggle, he often thought, when someone else can do it better? That summer, whispers of a great storm began to spread across the valley. Old Mr. Harris, who had farmed the land for 60 years, warned the villagers one evening in the tavern. "The clouds to the north are heavy. A storm's brewing, one like we haven't seen in a decade." The villagers grew uneasy. A storm during harvest season could flatten wheat, flood homes, and destroy weeks of labor. Families began to prepare, reinforcing roofs, tying down fences, and storing food supplies. Clara, too, looked at the skies with concern. She asked Ethan to help strengthen their roof with wooden planks and secure the barn doors. Ethan agreed quickly. "Don't worry, Mama. I'll ask Jacob and Matthew to help. They're older and know what to do." True to his word, Ethan went to Jacob and Matthew, his childhood friends. They promised eagerly, "Of course, Ethan, we'll come by tomorrow afternoon." But tomorrow passed, then the next day. Jacob was busy helping his father, and Matthew had errands of his own. Ethan shrugged it off. "They'll come eventually," he told his mother. Clara only sighed and kept working alone. The wind grew harsher each night. The sky grew darker. The signs of the storm became impossible to ignore. Yet, Ethan still waited. It came suddenly, with a force that shook the valley. One evening, just as the sun sank behind the hills, the sky roared like an angry beast. Thick clouds rolled in, and a wall of rain pounded the earth. The wind howled, tearing through trees and bending wheat stalks until they lay flat against the ground. Clara rushed to close the shutters while Ethan scrambled to bring the chickens into the coop. But the coop door, left unrepaired, rattled dangerously against the wind. A gust blew it wide open, scattering feathers and frightened clucks into the storm. Ethan tried to hold it shut, but the hinge gave way. Inside the house, the roof groaned. Water leaked through gaps Clara had begged Ethan to fix. Buckets filled quickly as rain poured through. "Ethan," she cried over the storm, "help me move the bed away from the leak." Ethan obeyed, heart racing. He had never felt so powerless. He thought of Jacob, of Matthew, of Uncle Samuel, all the people who had promised help. None were here. That night, the storm raged on. The fields were battered, the roof damaged, and their little home bore the scars of nature's fury. Ethan sat by the window, staring at the chaos outside. For the first time, he felt the heavy weight of relying on others. The next morning, silence hung over the valley. The storm had passed, leaving behind broken fences, fallen trees, and fields half drowned in water. Neighbors were busy repairing their own homes. When Ethan asked Jacob for help with their damaged roof, Jacob shook his head regretfully. "I'm sorry, Ethan. Our barn nearly collapsed. I have no time to spare." Matthew said the same. Uncle Samuel, too, was overwhelmed with his own troubles. Everyone had promises, but no hands free to offer. Ethan's chest tightened. For the first time, he saw the truth clearly. He and his mother were alone in this. That evening, Clara sat by the fireplace, mending a torn blanket. She looked at her son, who sat silently in the corner, lost in thought. "Ethan," she said softly, "I know you're disappointed, but sometimes life teaches us in harsh ways." He looked up at her, eyes wet. "Why does no one keep their word, Mama? They all said they'd help, but when we needed them most, no one came." Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. "It is not that people are unkind. It is that each person has their own burdens, their own responsibilities, and when you rely too much on others, you give away your own power. Do you understand?" Ethan shook his head, though deep inside, something in him stirred. Clara smiled sadly. "Your father once told me, when you wait for others, life waits with you. But when you move, life moves too. Perhaps now, my son, it is time for you to move." That night, after the storm, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the drip, drip of rainwater still leaking through the roof. His mind replayed his mother's words over and over. "When you wait for others, life waits with you. But when you move, life moves too." For the first time, those words didn't sound like something distant or abstract. They felt real. He remembered standing helpless while the storm tore through their home, remembered the hollow feeling in his chest when no one came. By morning, he had made a decision. At breakfast, Clara noticed her son's unusual silence. "Ethan," she asked gently, "what troubles you?" He looked at her with a seriousness she rarely saw in his young face. "Mama, I don't want to wait anymore. I want to fix the roof. I want to fix the coop. I'll do it myself." Clara's eyes softened with pride, though she masked it with caution. "It won't be easy. Your hands will ache. You may fail more than once. Are you ready for that?" Ethan swallowed. If I don't try, we'll keep suffering. If I try and fail, at least I'll know I didn't just sit and wait." For the first time, Clara saw a spark of manhood flicker in her boy. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then I will guide you, but the work will be yours." And so, with a hammer too heavy for his grip and nails that slipped through clumsy fingers, Ethan began. The roof was his first battle. He dragged a ladder from the barn, its wood rough against his palms. His heart pounded as he climbed, the ground seeming farther with every step. Up close, the roof looked worse than he imagined. Broken shingles, loose boards, gaps wide enough for rain to pour through. Ethan knelt, hands trembling. He placed the first plank across a gap and tried hammering it down. Clang! The nail bent sideways. He cursed under his breath, his frustration rising. But Clara's voice floated up from below. "Steady, Ethan. Take your time. No one builds perfectly on the first strike." So he tried again, and again. By the fifth attempt, the nail finally drove straight into the wood. A small victory, but to Ethan, it felt like conquering a mountain. The sun blazed overhead, sweat trickled down his back, and blisters formed on his hands. By evening, he had patched only a small corner of the roof. Exhausted, he climbed down, his arms heavy as stone. Clara handed him a cup of water, smiling. "You've done more in one day than you did in all the weeks of waiting. How do you feel?" Ethan looked at the patched corner, crooked but sturdy. He felt sore, but inside him bloomed a strange new warmth, pride. "I feel strong," he whispered. Days turned into a week. Each morning, Ethan rose earlier than before, determined to add one more piece, drive one more nail, fix one more gap. The work was slow. His hands grew rough, his arms ached. Sometimes he sat on the roof in frustration, ready to give up. But each time he remembered the storm, the helplessness, the hollow promises of others. That memory pushed him forward. The villagers noticed. Old Mr. Harris passed by one afternoon, leaning on his cane. "Boy," he called, squinting up at Ethan on the roof, "you're doing that yourself?" Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. "Yes, sir." The old man nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Good. A man learns his worth when he builds with his own hands." Word spread. Some neighbors stopped to watch. Others offered advice. But Ethan refused their promises of help. He thanked them politely and kept working. For the first time, he wanted the effort to be his own. By the second week, the roof no longer leaked. The coop was repaired, sturdier than before. Ethan had built calluses on his hands and a quiet confidence in his heart. When the wheat finally ripened, golden and tall, the village gathered for harvest. Families worked together, bending under the sun, their laughter mixing with the rustle of stalks. Ethan and Clara stepped into their field, sickles in hand. In previous years, Ethan would have waited, asking neighbors to join, relying on their help. But this time, he worked alongside his mother, determined to see the job through. The work was hard. His back ached, his arms grew tired. But each bundle of wheat he cut filled him with satisfaction. By evening, sweat-soaked and weary, he looked at the growing stacks of wheat with pride. A few villagers passed by and marveled. "Ethan, you've changed," Jacob said quietly. "We thought you'd wait for us again." Ethan smiled faintly, not boastful, but certain. Waiting doesn't put food on the table. Working does. Jacob and Matthew exchanged glances. They saw it too. Their friend was no longer the boy who depended on empty promises. He was becoming something more. By the season's end, Ethan and Clara had repaired their home, secured their food, and harvested their field. Their cottage, once battered by storm, now stood stronger than before, a reflection of the boy who had built it back with his own hands. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara looked at her son, pride shining in her eyes. "Ethan," she said softly,
Do you see now why I let you struggle? Why didn't I rush to fix everything for you? Ethan nodded slowly. Because you knew no one else would do it for me. Because you wanted me to learn that waiting makes you weak, but working makes you strong. Clara smiled, tears brimming. Yes, my son, you have learned the greatest lesson of life, responsibility. When you take charge of your own tasks, no storm, no disappointment, no unkept promise can break you. Ethan gazed into the fire, his heart steady. He knew he was still young, with much to learn. But he also knew one thing with certainty. He would never again wait for others to shape his life. He would stand, work, and carve his own path. Through Ethan's journey, we are reminded of a timeless truth. Relying too much on others leaves us powerless, but taking responsibility gives us strength. Help may come, but it is uncertain. Your own effort, however, will never abandon you. So, dear reader, rise each morning with courage. Take charge of your tasks, your dreams, your responsibilities. Do not wait for others to build your future. Build it yourself, one nail, one step, one harvest at a time. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need this lesson. Leave your thoughts, and remember, your strength lies within you.